It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means. It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Yeah, baby. Thank you, fake audience. Thank you, cheap band. Hello, everybody. Hope you had a good weekend. Let me get the chat room open. There you guys are. Hello. So last week, after I finished that episode, got a bunch of emails from people saying, can you play some examples of buttoned endings and easy edit points? So I thought that would be a great show this week. What did I want to tell you? Oh, I did finally speak to Chuck Henry and his frequent sidekick, Stephen Baird, and they are both good for doing episodes. We're going to do 2 remote episodes sometime in May. I can't remember the exact dates, but I'm going to go to Chuck's studio in Hollywood, and we're going to do an episode on building hip-hop instrumental tracks. And then the following Monday, we're going to go back again, and Steve is going to do some other genres of music. So the education continues with the help of your fellow members. All right, so I want to get right to it. Edit points, easy edit points, buttoned endings, stinger endings. Andy, who is our head screener, gave me an email that he sent to a member some time ago. Actually, not that long ago. That explained some stuff. Andy used to be a music editor. So here are some notes that he sent the member about things that make a good edit point. A solid hit from all main instruments on the downbeat of the bar, a kick drum, a cymbal crash perhaps, a bass note, a guitar chord, snare hits, hi-hat hits, anything that's percussive and gives you something good to cut on. The same/similar instrumentation throughout all potential edit points so that the material before the edit matches or at least has a sonic connection to the new material after the edit. And you know what? A great producer named Tom Dowd taught me a million years ago, back when we used to cut quarter-inch tape to do edits, that the law of reciprocity. You can always put it back together, but you want to make sure that whatever you're editing from and editing to, that the same stuff, which is what Andy said, appears on both sides of the edit. Natural setups between sections. These will make the original unedited song stronger too. So natural setups between sections. In other words, coming in on a big downbeat, maybe a big drop. Bam, that's a good edit point. Things that will make more difficult edit points. Cymbal swells or rises that play across an edit point. Oh yeah. I can remember doing many, many edits in my career where you go, oh, crap, there's a cymbal there, and the cymbal's on the front half of the edit, but not on the back half, and it just goes away, and it sounds stupid. Unless the same sound is present across both the source and the destination edit points, there's no chance that the edit will sound seamless. That's true. Reverb from previous parts that is ringing out across the edit point. If you don't have that same reverb, there's that law of reciprocity. If you don't have the same reverb on the backside, on the destination edit point, as Andy calls it, you'll end up with echoes or reverbs that appear to come out of nowhere, and it's another dead giveaway that there's an edit there. Pads or sustained instruments across edit points. I mean, anything that's like legato, a cello part, a string part, a synth part, even like a note ringing out on a guitar or a piano, anything that's like a whole note that's ringing out across the edit point, unless there is the reciprocal of that on the other side at the same level and the same note, it's going to sound horrible. Poor timing of edit points, giving a flammed sound, flammed. This makes the exact edit hit point difficult to find and match in the edit. I'm not really sure what he means there. That makes the exact edit hit point difficult to find. Anyway, yeah, you want to edit where it's obvious. And remember, this all started because I kept hearing stuff coming in from Taxi members where people would leave like a whole note rest from coming out of one section before they go into another section, leaving a whole note rest. And sometimes that can work. if maybe it's an eighth note or a 16th note, but a whole note can be pretty obvious and a little devastating. Vocal melody pickups that happen before the edit point. Nowadays, a lot of vocals start on the and before the downbeat, and if you try to do an edit on the downbeat, you're going to have a vocal that's going to be bloop, and it's going to sound weird. So there's some good stuff from Andy, and putting that away. I want to play you something that I found in my pile of Taxi TV CDs. This is left over from March 3rd of 2014. This is from Taxi member Keith LeBrant, who is a good friend of mine, a good friend of many of our members, very talented, very successful. And he sent in some examples of stingers. So did I reach out to him for permission to play it again? No. Would he be fine with me playing it? Absolutely. So these are stingers, and these are, like maybe, here, we're going to find out. Probably like 10-second singers, a 5-second, a 2-second, different cut downs. And these are stingers, which are, in the context of a whole cue, this would be what the cue ends on. And as you become a little more sophisticated, you could just chop the end and use pieces of that for accentuating a transition from one scene to another, ending a scene, all kinds of uses for stingers. Technically, a stinger is a buttoned ending. It kind of ends on a beat, usually goes back to the root. But a stinger is probably implies a little more emphasis, maybe, than a buttoned ending could just be a note on a piano. It's any sort of definitive hard ending, whereas a stinger has a little more ta-da. So let's hear some variations of stingers from Keith LeBrant. That was a stinger. And here's the long version, I hope. Okay. Shorter version. Really short version. And short version with longer sustains. So I hope that helps to give you some idea of what a stinger sounds like. All right. Moving on. So we've got 11 tracks. By the way, Bria, who is producing today's show, told me that many, many people sent in links to their music where it could be streamed on SoundCloud, but not download links. And we clearly say in the emails, send us places where we can stream it, see if it's right for the show, and then download it as well so that we can actually use it on the show. So, who said that? Joey Hatcher says, stinger for reality shows about bees. Yeah, there is no reality show about beekeepers. That sounds like a new show. Okay, so this first one, and remember, what I want to do is after it's done, don't vote early. If you hear good edit points and a good buttoned or stinger ending, give +1s, okay? I'll remind you to vote after the show, and then we'll talk about it. And then, after the song, the cue, and then we'll move on down the line. So here comes the first one, and it is called Not That Simple. Come on. Notice the extra instrumentation that was added? Makes it interesting. And I'm guessing something interesting will happen coming up. Yep. +1 if you think that that was well executed, had good edit points and a good buttoned and or stinger ending. And while you guys are voting, I know there's a little delay. I would say that that would be called dramedy music, just in case you were wondering, and with a hip-hop beat. We're getting a lot of very positive +1s, and so they should be, because that was really, really well done. It's a great example of a cue. You know what? Let's go back and listen to it one more time, and I'll talk more while it's rolling, because I know you love when I talk. But let's analyze it and discuss why it's good. So here we go. Starts out simple, no intro, goes right into the red meat, as I like to call it. Figure repeats twice. Edit point. I think there's another pizzicato string part on top there. You know where we say add and subtract instrumentation to keep it interesting? There's some added instrumentation. Let's see what happens here. Little variation. Same piece, but a little variation. So the editor could just take this section and use it. Nice. Anyway, I think that's like perfectly executed. Great job. All right. Any thoughts or questions from you guys? I see everybody's excited. Robbie Hancock got a new MacBook Pro. Congratulations, Robbie. It's not like it's the birth of a kid or anything, but okay, new computers count. All right, so I just thought that was excellent. A great example of what can be done. And it was relatively simple, but just beautifully executed. So let's move on. This one is called Breaking Boundaries. Let's have a listen. breaking it down. It's going to come back full, I'm guessing. I guessed wrong. All right. So cast your votes. +1 if you think that had some good edit points and a good buttoned ending on it. I'm curious to think or to hear what you guys would classify that as. I made a note. I listened to it before the show. What genre, what type of cue you would call that? Pop rock. Somebody, I just saw the word anthemic scroll by, and I wrote down uplifting anthemic pop rock. Ooh, Joey Hatcher is calling it uplifting aspirational. That's a good word. I like that. Light rock. Peter Rahill wants to know if elevator music is uplifting. I would think, yeah, elevator music, they wouldn't want something that sounds like a funeral dirge playing in the elevator, unless, of course, you were at a funeral home. Ooh, Mary Band asks or suggests that you might ask if lift music was elevating. I love it. Okay, so that got, I think, everybody voted +1 except for 2 or 3 people. Basically pretty good. You know, I hear something beeping somewhere. Let's go back and listen to a little bit of that again. I think the end sounds like it was a hard cut, like there was an intro cut off, and it sounds a little strange to me. So any of those downbeats you could cut on. You could start right on that piano figure as a good end point. Cut it right there. I think it's editable almost anywhere where you're starting a section. You'd have to be a reasonably good editor, but it's editable. And I like the way that there are different motifs going on. I mean, it's the same chord progression, but there's a piano figure, there's a guitar figure, and any one of those sections, if you just needed 5, 10, 20 seconds, could be used on its own, or you could use the whole piece and it sounds pretty congruous. You know what I'm trying to say. Okay. Mary Band says, I need to make a lot of money before rally time. It's not like we've got a casino in the hotel, Mary Band. Uh, Bob Lagrasso and Andy say that there are not edit points. I don't know. I disagree, guys. I could cut that thing. Um, yeah, I could cut it. Maybe not every edit that I thought I heard would work, but I could definitely cut that. Moving on, let's listen to this one, which is called Lost in the Mud. Like that title. Two gunfighters battling for a Dorito chip. I love it. Long. All right. Cast your votes +1 if you think that had good edit points and a good buttoned or stinger ending on it. A lot of you guys are talking about suggested uses No Country for Old Men. Did anybody see the movie The Counselor? I can't remember the guy's name who's the actor in it. It was about a lawyer that got involved with some bad drug dudes. Could have worked well in that. And I wrote down The Counselor, Sweaty Desert. Although most deserts are pretty arid. You probably turn into human jerky before you sweat. Six String Samurai. Michael Fassbender, very good. Or did you Google that? It was a pretty good movie. Very intense. I think his girlfriend, whose name escapes me, but a gorgeous actress, might have had her head chopped off in that movie. Um, Andy says, +1, it wins by being sparse. You could cut and fade on a lot of those dobro slide hits. I agree. First of all, I think the cue is good. A lot of us could imagine scenes. Um, Yep, Polly, The Counselors, the movie with Brad Pitt. Remember that wire thing that went around his neck, tightened up till it kind of cut his head off? Thought that was cool. Everybody should have one of those. Seems very practical. I'm kidding, of course. But I thought it was a good cue. It made you feel something. It made you feel kind of desperate and tense. And I think all of us were thinking about the desert. Um, So I thought it worked, and I could hear places, especially good endpoints where you could start like on a dobro note. It doesn't always have to be a drum hit, or it doesn't always have to have a section that with any sort of rest in there or space in there. Sometimes you could just start something right on a dobro note, as long as there's nothing like a cymbal or a previous dobro note or reverb that's hanging over from before. Sometimes you can just do that. It doesn't always have to be on a percussive. Well, a guitar note can be percussive in and of itself. Um, all right. So I'm thinking it's mostly +1s. I haven't seen a lot of numbers go by. Yeah, if you don't like people getting hurt, don't watch the movie The Counselor. But it's a pretty good movie. I don't think it did all that well in theaters, but it was definitely worth watching. All right. So overall, pretty darn good. The next one is called White Lion. Oh, good. I made notes on that one too, which I'll share with you momentarily. Let's have a listen. I thought for sure there'd be something there. I'm Interested to see how you guys vote. So cast those votes. +1 if you thought it had great edit points and a good button door stinger ending on that sucker. Forgot to turn my ringer off. Oh no. Okay. It's funny, different people had different take on how that one could be used. I made a note that it was kind of CSI-like procedural, and then I remembered the movie Spring Breakers. About 3 or 4 teenage girls that end up with a really bad dude in, I think, Miami during, or somewhere in Florida during spring break, and they get involved in all kinds of hijinks that revolves around guns and drugs. Jesse Peck says Waterworld. Just saw that movie again the other night on TV. Sailing, crossing the ocean. Musical Lucy likes the scissor gesture. Yeah. I agree with John Michael Carnatz that the ending point on this one was a little strange. And yes, those of you who are saying that it became cinematic, absolutely. At some point it became almost like trailer music, but never quite really took off. But yeah, let's go back and listen to a little of it. I think that there were some edit points in there. Well, first of all, you could cut on any of those. But then this, when you bring in these strings, they're hanging over the edit points. So you've got to look for that reciprocal strings on the other side. Imagine this, if you will, without the string parts. Right there in the boom, 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 you could come in on that. Okay, get the idea. And I see people, I want to address this while it's still in the chat room. Polly says, yeah, sure, divide it into 2-bar phrases, cut it on the and of 4. That's fine, but is that what the screeners are listening for, or do they want clear edit points? They want a great piece of music. You know, if something is a really great cue, and it doesn't have abundant edit points, but it's usable and it's emotive and supports an emotion, it's going to get forwarded. They're not going to go, oh, well, this doesn't have enough good edit points. And frankly, a good editor could cut that thing. I personally just don't love that string sound. It just doesn't sound that real. But I love the underlying drum stuff. And it does have sort of a... If you listen to the percussive synth parts, it's very procedural. But when you combine it with all the orchestral stuff, the cinematic stuff, it kind of loses its identity. It goes from being like a CSI procedural kind of piece of music. When I say procedural, like when they're looking through the microscope or they're pulling fibers off of something, you'll hear stuff that's this kind of techie, rhythmic, percussive, synthy stuff. But then it goes cinematic, and it kind of loses its identity. It's not bad, but I think it could use some work, and that string part for me, the sound just doesn't use it. Yeah, the listings do say 2 minutes long, easy edit points, short intros or no intros at all. You know, I could cut that sucker because I'm that good. I think any editor could cut that. But that is the main point. One of the main points of the whole thing is you want to give people in the industry music that makes it easy for them to do their job. The first thing they're going to look for is, does it work with the scene emotionally? Second thing is, okay, I've got 16 and a half seconds that I need the music for. I hear a spot that works emotionally for that. Is there a good end point, or is the beginning work as it is? Is there a good out? Is there a way in the middle to take the beginning 4 bars and cut it to the button stinger and ending? Those are all the considerations, and that stuff should be pretty obvious to the editor or the supervisor. And if they hear it, they'll go for it. If a supervisor had 2 pieces of music that are equally as wonderful, and one is easier to cut than the other, I would imagine that they would probably default to the one that's easier to cut, just because they need to move, especially if they're doing TV episodic stuff or a reality show and it's on a weekly basis. They're in a tight schedule, especially reality, with as many cues that are in those shows. They're not going to want to spend a half an hour cutting that. They're going to want to spend 3 minutes or 5 minutes cutting it. So make it easy. Right. Cale Clemens saying you could cut in the middle of a string part as long as you have a string part on the other side. Yeah, that's that law of reciprocity I was talking about. Uh, which are more valuable, edit points in or edit points out, or is there a difference? Nah, not really. Um, Okay, so again, all this stuff so far has been usable, if not really good. Now we're moving on to number 5, which is We're in It Now. Okay, let's listen to that ending again. I like some of the sounds in this. Okay, I forgot the audience. Cast your votes. +1 if you think it had a good stinger or button ending on it, and if it had some good edit points. -1 if you do not agree. And while you guys are voting, I want to address 2 things that I saw scroll by in the chat room. One, TuneUp said Dave Trotter, who is a library owner that has spoken many times at the Road Rally, said silence, before an edit point is needed. I don't agree with Dave Trotter on that. It's not always needed. And somebody said, I thought we were talking about easy edit points. Easy is relative. For a pro editor, even a video editor with any musical chops, it's all right. This one's coming in with almost all, with a few exceptions, but almost all -1s. Yeah, the ending on that one was just a bad cut, just weird. That's funny. Mary Band and I disagree on that one. He thought the ending was good, but -1 for the edit points. Anyway, I guess easy edit points is relative, but any pro in the industry, any video editor with any musical chops can cut just about, and I'm saying just about, okay, italicized the just about anything. It's just the more beat driven it is, the easier it is to cut. The less kind of legato and strung out with lots of long whole notes and lots of reverb, the easier it is to cut. But I mean, a really skilled music editor or engineer or even a video editor can cut just about anything within reason. I mean, there's some stuff that you just can't. As somebody mentioned earlier in the show in the chat room, if you've got stems, which are submixes, and you can, let's say on that one previous where there was the string part, had a very rhythmic synth part. If you had that broken out so that the strings were a separate element, their own stem, and the synth part and the drums were in their own submix, and you took the strings out of that thing, you could cut that thing all day long. Put the strings back in, makes it a little harder. But yeah, this last one, it had interesting sounds and created kind of an underscore vibe, not a classic like orchestral underscore vibe, but it had a vibe to it. It just didn't feel like it was 100% there yet to me. But definitely in the ballpark, just not really there. Okay, moving on to number 6, which is called Indie Thoughts. No, it's not my mic clipping. I'm looking. The levels are actually fairly low here. cast your votes. +1 if you think it had good edit points and had a good ending. And while you're doing that, I am going to address something I think I said in the last show that McGath and a couple other people have brought up. I didn't say all editors all the time look at the waveform. I think it was, I mentioned Frank Palazzolo mentioned it on a session he did. He's a music supervisor, did a great session at the rally last year. Or maybe it was a library owner on a panel. I don't know exactly who it was, but somebody brought up the point that they will look at the waveform of something, and if they don't see some spikes in the waveform that make it look like there are places to edit, spikes or valleys for that matter, they may not check something out. Then again, if a piece of music came to them highly recommended, if a supervisor said to an editor, "Oh, you've got to put this in. It's just so good for the scene." It's not like the editor is going to throw it out because the waveform appeared to be flat all the way across. So there are no 100% rules. Everything is subject to a situation, I think. This one had a lot of +1s to it, and I made a note. It was kind of indie pop rock. Mojo says hyper compressed material can be harder to edit. Certainly looks different on the waveform, huh? Yeah, the mix on that one wasn't bad. I mean, I wouldn't listen to it and go, "Wow, that sucked," by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't the whole piece. It was pleasant and it was good. It's got very defined sections. You can hear the kick drum well enough. I personally might have brought it up a little more. I mean, you could cut on the hi-hat in this thing. Somebody was asking, what about the delay on the end? And womp, 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 womp. There are times it could be a negative, other times where it probably wouldn't phase somebody, but I think that you might be onto something, might be a safer, more usable piece if it didn't have that on the end. Mojo says, you can tell ML's done a bunch of editing. Yeah, back in my day, it was all done in 1/4-inch tape. I mean, sometimes we cut the 2-inch. And we cut it with razor blades and used tape to put it back together, and you had to get really good at that. When I got into doing post-production in New York and would record voiceovers all the time, taking out breaths, taking out mouth clicks, denture clicks, all kinds of stuff. You had to become really, really good at editing, and anybody who's been in the professional voiceover recording business will tell you that those editors are among some of the best on the planet. They move really quickly, where other people used to sit there, rock guys, audio engineers that did records would sit there going, rolling the tape back and forth, endlessly trying to find the perfect edit point, whereas voiceover guys would literally just spool the tape to the floor, and as it was getting pulled by the puck in the capstan and dumping tape on the floor, they just hit the stop button, grab the tape on either side of the playhead, lay it in the block without even marking it with a grease pencil, and cut it. I remember I was taught early in the game taking grease from the side of your nose and using that to mark the tape. And obviously you had to mark it like a 1/2 inch to the right or the left of the edit point because the tape wouldn't hold if there was grease on the tape. But Yeah, I loved cutting quarter-inch tape, and Gail's bringing that up. Um, how many times did you have to go through all the tape on the floor to find the ending D? I once did an edit. It was a Ronald Reagan speech. Remember? Well, the presidents still do it, I believe. They have like a speech or an address from the Oval Office that's usually broadcast on Saturdays, and some of President Reagan's people were in New York, and he mispronounced the word heritage. He went heritage and just slurred it. And it was so obviously bad. And my job was to fix it. We got a call from somebody in his entourage, and they brought this piece of tape over. And so I just went out in the studio and grabbed a microphone. Let's call this an 87, and went and tried all different levels and attacks of and cut in my on his heritage and made it into heritage, and it worked. So almost anything can be done with the razor blade if you've had enough practice. Yep, nose grease. All right. Did we vote on that last one? I can't even remember. Let's go back. Yeah, we did. And I think it got mostly +1s. Okay. What if you had dry skin? There's always grease somewhere. All right, let's move on. This one is called, where are we? There we are. All in the Family. Let's have a listen. Sounds like a Tom Bodett Motel 6 commercial. See, that was an example of something that's got, let's go back a little on that. It's got a little rest right before the edit point. Right there. So, yeah, that was a very obvious edit point. Let's go back. Let's check that out. Okay. Here comes a new section. So those are really big, obvious edit points. You could bring it in right here where the pedal steel jumps in. All right, cast your votes. +1 if you heard edit points in there. Well, I think we all heard edit points in there. And if you thought the ending was a good ending. definitely authentic. And the players are really good on that. McGay said, "Yay! At last, I could tell where the edit points were." It is a talent or a skill set to learn that stuff. I'm telling you, my very first week in the industry, working at Criteria Studios in Miami, Florida, um, I didn't know what a kick drum sounded like. I was a studio virgin. I didn't know anything about anything, really. Um, all right, so that one got a lot of plus ones. And remember the Captain and Tennille song, Love Will Keep Us Together? I remember I was driving a rental car from Rent-A-Wreck because the engine on my car blew up. So I was driving like an AMC Gremlin. It was about 10 years old. Had a really crappy AM radio with a like just horribly distorted speaker in the dashboard in mono, of course. And I just remember hearing Love Will Keep Us Together, and the kick drum was so pronounced on that thing. And it was like, the sky opened up and rays of sunlight came beaming down on me, and angels were singing. And it's like, I can hear the kick drum. And all of a sudden, I understood, what you could edit on. I could hear beats in the music. It's just like everything became clear because of that song and that moment of time in time. So I get it, McGath. Um, Norman Conquest says, anytime I use starts and stops, the screener said it was wrong. Yeah, seriously, when you use stops and starts, it just, sometimes I've heard stuff from taxi members and I go, it could have been editable without that. And when you're using the stops and starts, it's too distracting. And doesn't really sound that good. Mojo says getting a kick drum heard on AM radio is no simple task. That's for sure. Um, all right. Somebody had the Levi edition of a Gremlin. God, just awful, awful car. I remember hating that thing, but then again, it was 10 years old and beat to crap. All right. So that one got a lot of pluses. Good job on that. Okay, here comes number 8, and this is called The Best Part. Too much of that. Goes on too long. I gotta pause it for a second. I bet you anything the guitar player mixed this. For those of you who are trying to figure out what it sounds like, Blondie. One way or another. I remember Blue Cheer. All right, certainly a buttoned ending on that one. A good example of just a regular old all-American buttoned ending on that sucker. So cast your votes. And remember, you're not voting about whether or not you thought the cue was good overall. You're casting your votes. Were there edit points in there that were easy enough? And what else? And the ending, which I already gave away the ending. It was good. My stomach is growling. Cale, you're leaving us? Dude, get back here. What could be more important than Taxi TV? Uh, kind of a mixed bag on this one. I'm going to go with like 60% minus ones and 40% plus ones. I mean, I think it was really easy to edit. I think that the ending was a good example of a buttoned ending. I don't know that it would be classified as a stinger, which is a little more pa-da. But just as an aside, the cue itself had potential. The mix was not great. It was very, very, very guitar centric. Could have used more bass and kick, just more drums and bass, period. And yeah, too repetitive. I mean, those sections just went on way too long. But man, give me a piece of quarter-inch and a razor blade, and I could fix that sucker in 10 minutes. Polly says, here's a tip for Mac users. If you're experiencing horrible delays with video freezes, clear your browser cache completely. Seems to have done the trick for me. Good advice. Interactive says, I'm guessing Interactive is the person whose cue it is. I took the vocals off this track. That's why it's so long in the verse. Should have edited for the submission. I agree with you. Yeah, this brings up an interesting point, which I would be happy to elucidate. Sometimes very often, you can take a song. Sometimes you'll see that people will run listings looking for, let's say, a soft rock instrumental. Like a singer-songwriter kind of thing. Oh gosh, what's her name? I don't know. I can't think of her name right now. But and you take the vocal out of the mix, so it's a mix minus vocal, and it becomes a good instrumental track. But sometimes the melody is so key. Oftentimes the melody is so key that when you take it out, basically what you have is something that sounds like a rhythm track. So you might want to replace the missing vocal with something that does kind of a stripped down, simpler melody. You may not want like a guitar part that would do the entire melodic phrases that the vocal would do, but maybe just a note for every bar or something that just gives it a little movement and a little interest so that it's not just straight ahead. And this was a really good example of over and over. It became too repetitive, whereas if it had some sort of melody put in there, it would have held the interest longer, or you could just cut down everything and shorten it by half. Okay. And we are up to number 9, which is called Clawhammer Joyride. That sounds scary to me, Clawhammer Joyride. Here we go. Yeah, baby. All right. Cast your votes. +1 if you could hear good edit points on that, and if you thought that it had a good buttoned ending, which pretty obvious. And while you guys are casting your votes, somebody asked, do you always have to cut on the downbeat or can you cut on any beat? You can cut on any beat, any note. I mean, this thing all the way through. I could cut this, anybody could cut this on any one of those banjo notes. They're very, very percussive. You may have to look out for the bass part. If there's a bass note hanging underneath it, you've got to look for a reciprocal bass note on the other side. There's something that made this potentially a little difficult to cut, and I'll mention it after you guys cast your votes. I want to see if anybody else picked up on it. I love the clapping emoji. All right, so the votes are in. I think everybody loved that piece. Couple of -1s, but almost everybody gave it a +1. You can cut on ongoing melodies. You just have to make sure that the melody works. I mean, I've created new melodies by editing. People trying to Mojo says clapping. Thought that was a jellyfish. It looks like a jellyfish to me. Okay, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that at some points, especially towards the end, it was picking up a little head of steam. So when you're editing, you have to be aware of that. Even though you may have the reciprocity you need and the beats to cut on, everything else is equal. If something wasn't cut to a click and the enthusiasm level is a little more testosterone driven, I don't know, or caffeinated. Sometimes you can do the edit and you can feel that it goes from a slight, I mean, literally just slightly slower to slightly faster. You can feel it over an edit. Anyway, that was the only potential problem I saw with that one, but I loved that piece. Thought it was really well executed, and that was some good picking. All right, moving on. This is number 10. This one is called Green Railway. Let's have a listen. Visual aid. Ow, that hurt. Yep, that's a horseshoe. All right, cast your votes. Um, +1 if you thought I had good edit points and a good ending, and -1 if you did not. And somebody just asked, Polly asked, is fret noise a bad thing? Honestly, it's contextual, but I would say more often than not, it's fine. It's part of the natural sound of the instrument. And frankly, if you were to be really, really fanatical and go in and cut out every fret noise if that were possible, the instrument wouldn't sound the same. So I don't think it's a problem. Oh, I just did speak to you about fret noise. You know, it all depends. Like I said, it's the context of the piece. Um, I didn't even notice the fret noise. I'm sure it was in there because you guys obviously did, but I wasn't paying attention to it. Ray Hill's got great advice. Don't fret the fret noise. Um, now, I'm not going to mention Bo. I can't mention any libraries on air because a million people, well, you know, ultimately a couple thousand people will see this and they'll all be reaching out to libraries. Um, but there are many, many libraries. As long as there's shows on the air that need stuff like for Duck Dynasty, many libraries supply music to shows like that. Things are going by too quick. Yeah, varying opinions on the fret noise thing, but generally speaking, it's just not that bad. I mean, sometimes you'll hear a particular, like I've heard where somebody is changing maybe from something high on the neck, and then they go to something lower on the neck, and you hear the finger drag on a wound string, and sometimes that can be a little bit obnoxious. There was something I heard at the end of this, and I want to see if anybody else hears it. And the clipping, I was looking at my levels. I mean, I was barely in the yellow, so I don't know why it's clipping today, but um, listen for a very high pitched thing. And I'm not talking about the tambourine. Right there. It's like fingers on a wine glass. I can't tell what that is. Um, and frankly, whatever it is, I would take it out because other people are going to hear that and go, "What is that?" And generally speaking, with cues, if somebody is going, "What is that?" it's distracted them away from the cue, so that means the cue could distract viewers away from the dialogue or what's going on in the show. Um, all right, we've got one more. And this one is number 11, and it is called Jack the Ripper. Let's have a listen. Did we vote on that last one? I think we did. Oh, Robbie says it was a harmonica. All right, cast your votes. +1 if you could edit that and if you thought it had a good button ending. I know, sorry, that one played a little softly because I turned the level down because people were complaining about the level on the one before. Or not complaining, mentioning. Still talking about that fret noise. Yeah, the chair squeak was probably me. I've done everything I can to get the squeak out of this chair. Want me to play it again? Excuse me, a little more level? All right, I'm going to play this one again, in all fairness to the creator, so that we can hear it a little better. Sorry about that. Come on, baby, fire up. There we go. Okay. See you, Tony. Could cut on any of that stuff, but it does depend on the legato stuff that's going on underneath it. Maybe. Cool, cute. I agree. It wouldn't distract from dialogue at all. And it's creepy. It's scary. You know something's going to happen. All right. So there we have it. All 11 of them. And that was a good cue. I like that piece. Good emotion, good execution. So we've got 5 minutes left. Got any general questions you want to ask, or should I just call it a night? Great for reality shows. Great for all. I was thinking remake of Silence of the Lambs, the scene where Jodie Foster is in the bad guy's house, and she can't see anything, and he's got on the night vision goggles. He can see her, but she can't see him. Well, that's a great question, Paulie. Would that be considered a fated ending? I'm going to play that end again. It is obviously fated, but it was kind of natural enough that it worked for me. Let's see. I personally would have let it ring out on its own. I don't know how long this cue is, so. It's good at building tension. It tells a story, but without distracting from the scene. See, the fade takes long enough that it doesn't sound horribly unnatural, but I personally might have just let the synth decay on its own. But really, really good. Okay, any questions? Or is it time to say goodbye? Oh, next week, no show. I'm not going to be in the office on Monday, but the following Monday, we will have a show. So, what is next Monday? Next Monday will be the 18th. So, April 25th, we will have a show. I did check the mic settings, Cass, and I don't know why it was breaking up because I actually brought down my mic about 3 dB from where I had it on last week's episode and saved that setting. And I was barely tipping into the yellow this week, so I don't know why it was breaking up. Weird. I am going to do Musical Lucy. I am going to do 2 more shows like the one I did at Steve Barden's house. Coming up, let me grab my book. Can write this in your calendars. Hey, by the way, remember the movie Now You See Me about the magicians and stage performances? It was kind of a whodunit thing, kind of. It was really good. I enjoyed it. It was out about 2 years ago. They've got a new one coming out, and our very own Matt Hurt and co-star Kelvin Tan have a song in it, and that is premiering on Friday, June 10th. So we're going to try and get a whole bunch of taxi members who live in LA to go to the opening of that movie. Where do I have those guys? May 16th, I've got Taxi member Richard Dance is going to be in town. And he's going to join me on the show again. He's done it a couple of times. Great guitar player. Chuck Henry, we are going to do a show. Ooh, I just realized Chuck said, can we do it on Memorial Day, Monday, May 30th? I didn't realize when I said yes to that, it's Memorial Day. So I'm willing to work on a holiday if Chuck is. And then the following Monday, June 6th, we've got Stephen Baird slated. And both of those are going to be remotes. But now that I've realized it's Memorial Day, maybe we'll do it on June 6th. And do the second one on June 13th. But so anyway, early to mid-June, we're going to do 2 more remotes in the studio, and that's that. All right, no more questions. All right, let's call it a night. Thank you very much for tuning in to the episode. I will see you guys not next week, a week later, all right? And until then, see you later from the production staff of Taxi TV Live. Bye, you guys.